Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the past week. We already covered Google Stadia in a standalone piece right after the announcement, so check that out if you want that news. But for this one, we're focusing back on PC hardware, and one of the bigger news items headlining this one is AMD and Samsung announcing that they're working together on a strategic partnership to license the RDNA architecture for mobile devices. That's one of the bigger news items of today's show. We also have further discussion on the US-China trade war and how it's impacting PC prices and the PC industry, some layoffs recently as well. And then we'll be talking about AMD and its x86 licensing to China for first-gen Ryzen and what's happening after that, along with some critical updates to Windows that you'll definitely want to grab. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's Conductonaut liquid metal. Conductonaut is what we've used in all of our liquid metal and D-Lit thermal tests, capable of dropping CPU thermals significantly when replacing the stock thermal interface. Lower CPU thermals don't just allow better overclocks, but also lower noise levels because the transfer efficiency is increased. The mix of gallium and indium makes for a thermal conductivity of 73 watts per meter Kelvin, outclassing traditional pastes significantly. Learn more at the link in the description below. So quick GN store news item first. We restocked the blue with gold trim beer glasses. If you've been wanting one of those, they are on store.gamersnexus.net. Fully restocked in all the SKUs. So thank you for your patience on that. AMD and Samsung announcing a strategic partnership for Radeon intellectual property. AMD and Samsung are looking to form a joint multi-year partnership that would see AMD licensing its Radeon graphics IP to Samsung. Samsung plans to leverage the AMD graphics technology, specifically the RDNA architecture that was disclosed at Computex a couple weeks ago at AMD's keynote, for use with its own ARM-based Exynos chips inside of mobile devices. And RDNA is what Lisa Su on stage was talking about being used for Navi coming up on the desktop side. This will likely allow Samsung to replace its existing Mali GPUs, which is more ARM-based intellectual property, and it also gives AMD Radeon graphics yet another platform and revenue stream to grow upon. This is something AMD has struggled with in the past, where it's, well, up until Ryzen, and even for Ryzen first gen, AMD has had to work with semi-custom solutions, semi-custom partners like the consoles with pretty low margins to try and gain some market share, well, to try and gain some money back so that they can then try and gain some market share back in the discrete component space. So what's going on here is it looks like AMD, having made inroads with its graphics IP outside of the PC industry, is going to have a continually successful semi-custom strategy and should start to build some additional revenue that it can then divert for other investments internally. AMD hopes to deliver solutions and is already on tap for delivering solutions for the immediate next-gen consoles by both Sony and Microsoft. And this is in addition to Google Stadia, which again we discussed in a separate piece yesterday at the time this went live, for Stadia using Radeon graphics. So AMD's got a couple of olive branches out there right now, and it looks like, even if some of these are lower margin, it's starting to build a platform upon which it can potentially scale to maybe grow its discrete GPU division again, because that is where AMD's hurting a lot right now versus NVIDIA in the PC industry. So partnering with one of the biggest phone manufacturers is certainly a potentially beneficial move for AMD. We don't know the details, obviously, on the partnership in terms of the financials, but it should be a good move. Certainly you'd hope they're not losing money. So AMD may be able to carve out a new path to market its Radeon and RDNA architecture moving forward, and this is something that we'll pay attention to. Even though we don't cover mobile devices, this is relevant to the PC industry. AMD is it's not a small company, but relative to Intel, it is a small silicon manufacturer. When you look at the sheer size of someone like Intel, or even NVIDIA, which is a massive company as well. So given that AMD is the smallest of the big three that we work with on this channel, any move like working with Samsung or Sony or Microsoft will impact how AMD grows and performs financially in our industry as well, because it's a small enough company, not small, but small enough relative to the others, that partnerships like these impact the bottom line in potentially a significant way as they begin to accumulate. So that's interesting news for AMD and something that we look forward to following more closely. Speaking of AMD, in additional AMD news, the other big announcement for the past week, other than Stadia, was the new Mac Pro, which has received unrelenting mockery online, particularly for its monitor stand. And this isn't really technically in in the news document today. I think when Eric was working on this one, he decided it wasn't worth giving a further beating. But the note here I'll make is that there was a monitor stand announced. It was at Apple's event. It's a monitor stand. That's literally all it does. It's not special. It's not magical, as Apple likes to call their devices. It doesn't even have one button, the thing Apple's best known for. No, it's a monitor stand, and it's literally $1,000. That's all it is. It is a $1,000 monitor stand for your monitor that does not come with its own stand. Anyway, alongside the groundbreaking, revolutionary monitor stand news, which has undoubtedly not even jokingly, it has legitimately overshadowed pretty much everything else because of the mockery it's received. Aside from the monitor stand, there was also some AMD componentry used in the new Mac Pro. And this is interesting stuff because it's not something that was released separately for the DIY market. So inside of Apple's new cheese grater, there are AMD workstation class GPUs that will come in two flavors. There's the AMD Pro Vega II and the AMD Pro Vega II Duo. For the time being, it seems AMD's newest cards will be solely available inside Apple's newest Mac Pro workstation, although we'll hopefully see this change. The new AMD Pro Vega II cards are based on AMD's second generation Vega architecture while using 7nm Vega 20 silicon. The AMD Pro Vega II offers 64 compute units or 4096 stream processors. The card's clock rate tops out at 1700 MHz, and it's capable of 14.2 teraflops of FP32 compute performance. The Pro Vega II card will also make use of 32 gigabytes of HBM2 memory across a 4096-bit memory bus, delivering up to 1 terabyte per second memory bandwidth. And the reason this is fun for enthusiasts is because the Pro Vega II Duo returns AMD to its dual GPU days, something we haven't seen for a little while. 295X2 is probably one of the more recent ones that we can all remember. So this offers two Vega 20 dies atop the same PCB, and the Pro Vega II effectively doubles the previous specifications, 128 CUs equal to 8192 stream processors, between the two devices, 28.4 teraflops of FP32 if you'd like to add it that way, and you can't really do this, but 64 gigabytes of HBM2 cumulatively between the two. Now, ultimately, if each one has its own bank of 32 gigabytes, but still, it's a lot of memory on one card. And now, of course, AMD's Infinity Fabric is the connecting link for all of this. So the interconnect the GPUs will communicate through is Infinity Fabric branded, and it's got 84 gigabytes per second of bandwidth per direction, and no word on price yet, individually anyway, but the GPUs will likely cost as much as a good used car. The Mac Pro, though, Eric Hamilton does our news roundups and scripting, does a fantastic job of it. But Eric did not put the Mac Pro in here, and I'm actually glad about that because that allows me to go off script for a second. Did anyone see that? The Mac Pro thing? We don't really follow Mac too much, or Apple. But so the case design, it's something that it seems like it leans more on the performance side. It's got holes in it, so that's actually good. It's something we liked seeing. We probably won't realistically be able to test it with our ATX test bench. It doesn't look like it'll fit. We'd have to custom modify it, and the problem is the only way we're working on this thing is if we buy it, and then after reviewing it, I would return it. And I'm not sure they'll take it back if I take a Dremel to the case, but maybe I could say it came that way. So anyway, we're probably not going to look at it. If we do, we'll look at the whole system. It doesn't look like ATX case benchmarking is going to work in this one without modifications, and they're like $6,000. There's some things I'll pay for. We're not only not going to make ROI on $6,000, we will lose a lot of money. So I'm not sure that'll happen. A lot of you have requested it though, so I didn't want to address it. Anyway, Samsung could oust TSMC as NVIDIA's foundry partner of choice for 7nm. That's another big news item here. It's a lot of silicon manufacturer news lately. So according to some of the reports in the industry lately, one of them being from industry soothsayers Digitimes, who publish a lot of actually really interesting stories, NVIDIA is intending to tap Samsung as its fab partner for 7nm Ampere. As far as we know, Ampere is intended as the successor to Turing, and If that's not the name, it doesn't matter. There's a successor to Taurian at some point. That's what we're talking about. There are precious little details about the architecture other than a 2020 release window for the next one. And it's been expected that NVIDIA would continue its long partnership with TSMC, but another report by Times claims that Samsung is, quote, aggressively undercutting TSMC with its own 7nm EUV node. Samsung landing NVIDIA as its 7nm partner is certainly something that would take the shine away from TSMC, who've been leading the pack in terms of foundry processes lately and landing major deals with people like AMD, who are growing right now quite a lot. The Times report said, quote, separately, one source said that Samsung is aggressively undercutting prices for its 7nm node with EUV, or extreme ultraviolet lithography, offering some startups a full mask set for less than a multi-layer mask, MLM, set at its rival. TSMC introduced the MLM mask sets in 2007 to lower costs for small volume runs. They are said to be about 60% of the cost of a full mask set. As Tom's Hardware notes, capacity could also be a consideration. TSMC's 7nm node has been seeing a burgeoning demand as of late, with AMD's Ryzen 3000 and EPYC Rome, as well as Apple's A13 chip coming later in the year. This news item is going to be a little bit longer, but the US-China relations, as it pertains to trade and tariffs, do impact the industry. It impacts PC hardware prices at some level, already has, and will continue to do so. In fact, at Computex, just about a week ago when we were closing out the show, we were talking with some of the case manufacturers and what their price targets were for cases coming out. And a lot of them were about $10 higher for the US than they had been planned when the cases were in development for the past maybe between 6 and 18 months, depending on what case it was. So it is impacting things. Now, there's more to talk about here. MSI is apparently preparing for the worst, in its own words. The EVGA has now publicly mentioned some layoffs internally, and there are server market pains as well. Also DRAM market pains, although no one feels bad for DRAM makers right now, given the last several quarters of borderline gouging prices. The US-China trade conflict continues to have adverse effects on many facets of the tech industry. Tensions between the US and China, for example, have resulted in Huawei getting more or less blacklisted. Some of the ramifications from that haven't fully been realized yet either. And on top of that, many American tech companies are being forced to drop their business with Huawei from that specific example. And the newest revelation is the impact that this will likely have on the DRAM market. So DRAM Exchange, a division of TrendForce, pointed out that, quote, as ripples from the US ban continue to spread, Huawei's shipments of smartphone and server products are feared to face heavy obstacles for the next 2 to 3 quarters, impacting peak season demand for DRAM products for second half and the time of price precipitation. TrendForce officially adjusts its outlook for third quarter DRAM prices from its original prediction of a 10% decline to a widened 10 to 15% decline. This was posted on DRAM Exchange. The report also notes that DRAM could rebound in 2020 behind bottoming prices and limited bit growth. Until then, it's unlikely that anyone empathizes with the DRAM makers, given the last several quarters of, again, really high prices and murmurings of price fixing and actual government investigations into it. Meanwhile, PC vendors like MSI have been caught directly in the crossfire of the tariff increases and the trade war, and Tom's Hardware was able to catch up with MSI CEO Charles Qian at Computex 2019, where he stated MSI was preparing for the worst. The full quote was, "I've been very, very busy lately. You always need to prepare for the worst, right? Right now, the $200 billion in trade is already at 25% tariff, and then we are worried the next wave will be $325 billion in goods at 25% tariff. That's why we need to prepare for the worst. So what I'm doing right now, we will move more and more capacity back to Taiwan. It is our short and mid-term strategy. In the long term, we will go to Vietnam or somewhere, but Taiwan is the short-term solution. That is the only way we can do it right now." And that's the quote from MSI CEO directly, as obtained by Tom's Hardware, who were at the show as well. This isn't the first company we've heard of moving manufacturing back to Taiwan, or not China in general. We visited MSI's factory in China not long ago, in about March, just before all of this started happening. And when we were there, they had already told us that there was about a 50% workforce reduction over the past few years as the company has moved to automate a lot of its lines. Now, from what the company and other companies in China have also told us, apparently it's not so easy to get the factory laborers that you would typically employ for those positions anymore, because in Shenzhen and Dongguan, a lot of the workforce has moved more towards the service industry and away from the factory life. But that was largely surmounted with automation, and a lot of it. But now it looks like these companies are mostly moving their operations to Taiwan, despite a lot of the larger of the manufacturers owning the factories that they use in China. And that's pretty rare. Most of the time companies will source factories but don't actually own them. So not sure exactly which companies we can publicly say are back in Taiwan for manufacturing, but suffice to say, most of the board partners that we work with regularly are either actively moving or have already moved manufacturing to Taiwan. And Gigabyte publicly has a factory in Taiwan, which is at more or less maximum capacity now, more than previously. And that's a factory we've actually toured too. Gigabyte is using that factory primarily for high-end boards, and then they're still in China for most of their other stuff, and we'll be looking at other solutions for longer term. So some vendors have been able to absorb the first wave of the tariffs without sacrificing pricing. Others are trying to wait it out. Some, like MSI, for instance, are moving product lines out of China altogether, or trying to, with little to no incentive to return, at least not in the immediate future. The tariffs have already affected our products as well at GN. So the mod mats, there was a tariff hike to 10% last year, 2018, end of year, and we absorbed that cost ourselves. The tariff hike now will impact us again, and we were worried that the tariffs might force us to increase mod mat prices, but I've spent personally the better half of the last week working with our partners, our distribution partners and manufacturing partners, in trying to find ways to cut costs elsewhere without cutting product manufacturing costs, so without reducing the quality of the product, and without increasing our prices. So we found some good solutions where we eat a little bit of margin, again, so it's starting to suck a lot, but we're not losing money, so that's good. And we're making enough money where we can justify making the mats, obviously, and we don't have to raise the prices, which is fantastic. But to do that required a lot of work on my part, on our partners' side of things, and the end result is that we found a few clever places to cut some of our costs without sacrificing anything, and a lot of those have to do with things like, shipping and logistics. Like, do we put more of them on a boat instead of a plane? That saves a lot of money, but it does mean that we have a 60-day cycle between mat inventory arriving. So we've managed to split the orders a bit in a way that saves us some money, gets the mats in early enough to meet the next orders, and then the rest of them will be following that on a bit of a latency, but the costs come down in a way that we don't have to increase the prices. So anyway, long story short, it affects us too. So finally, the server market continues to see some uncertainties as well as a result of the US-China trade war. And there's another quote here from Digitimes. This one says, as suppliers for the cloud computing data center segment are still clearing their inventory and US-China trade tensions have created uncertainties, demand for data center servers has been decreasing since early 2019 and may cause Intel's data center business group to suffer its first on-year revenue decline in 10 years in 2019. So the problem that the server market faces appears to be two-pronged. Huawei's blacklisting will cause major server outfitters like Intel and NVIDIA to lose revenue. And more to the point, China could retaliate by boycotting some US goods, cutting server companies off from the Chinese market period, or in large part. And then back to the mod mats briefly, being a smaller manufacturer, we're able to allocate all of our time for the amount of time needed to figure out pricing in a way that it doesn't go up for people buying the product. I personally really don't want the price to go up. Like, we're pretty happy with where they are. Losing margins is not fun, obviously, but we'd rather take a bit more of a margin hit, again, than increase the prices. So can't guarantee this forever. If the tariffs keep going up, it will eventually force us to increase prices. We're doing our best to stay ahead of it. We are very proactive in this. And anyway, obviously our our number one goal here as a smaller manufacturer where I'm directly involved. It's not like some CEO, super top level, 20 steps above the product being made. I mean, this was my product. My goal is to make sure people can actually get it at the price that we want to sell it for, not at a higher price than, you know, that it starts pricing people out. So anyway, that's the goal. Moving on, AMD will no longer license x86 chip designs to China. AMD's 2016 technology licensing deal it struck with China will come to an end, as Lisa Su confirmed with Tom's Hardware last week. China will still be able to develop chips based on AMD's first generation of Zen, and this encompasses Ryzen and EPYC Naples as well. However, AMD will not extend its more recent x86 IP, including the recent Zen 2 architecture and Rome, to China for the licensee. This was known as the Tianjin Haiguan Advanced Technology Investment Company Limited. Go figure, it's the English word I'd screw up on. The deal between AMD and China served as both a path to the lucrative Chinese market for AMD and a chance for China to develop its own x86 technology. Regarding the future of this group, Lisa Su stated, quote, "We are not discussing any additional technology transfers," and said that this was a single generation technology license and there are no additional technology licenses. On to Intel, quote, X499 news. A few things here. So X499, X499 motherboard, in quotes, was shown at Computex. We spoke to Gigabyte about this. So this first was brought to my attention when we were on with PC World on one of their videos, and Gordon mentioned to me on camera, did you see the Gigabyte X499 leak? And do you think it was a real leak? So the story as it goes was that there was a sticker on top of the name, and someone peeled it off. And ooh, gotcha, they caught Gigabyte, and it's an X499 board. To disappoint everyone, that was not an X499 board. So a few things here. One of them, companies do this a lot. Motherboard manufacturers start developing their product before the chipset's available to them. And we've seen this. We've seen it with X570, 470, and even 370. And when I say we, I mean sometimes us exclusively without the ability to publish it, and sometimes we've been able to publish it, even as much as looking at the motherboards on camera. But what is often not allowed in those circumstances is the removal of a chipset heatsink. And that's because although the board might be ready, like the PCB and the VRM, or partially ready, and although the name of the board might be ready and printed onto the engineering sample, there's not actually that chipset on it. So again, X570, 470, 370, even Z390, Z370, Z270, basically every board we've ever reported on where we got to see it in advance, whether we could tell you about it or not, they did not have the chipsets on them when it was far enough in advance that the launch was still several months away. So they were engineering boards, often with the older chipset, for testing and validation purposes. Now, raises the question, is it still an X570 board then? Is it still an X499 board then? Well, the answer is no, it's not. But it might eventually be one. The question in this instance, though, expands to, will it ever be X499, or is it just going to stay X299? And this is where we can read some of the statement that I got from Gigabyte, which we've already published on our YouTube community page, but we'll go through it here. Here's what we posted on the YouTube community page. We said we asked Gigabyte about that X499 motherboard spotted at Computex 2019, the one we talked about in the video on PC World, and Gigabyte officially confirmed to GN that the board is X299, the chipset is the same as 2 years ago, and the sticker is a mix-up or a mistake. X499 doesn't presently exist as a chipset. We went on to say it might closer to launch, but that board didn't have it. That's a placeholder. Gigabyte might call that board, and probably will, X299G to differentiate the newer SKUs, but it's the same X299 chipset on that convention show board. And we just wanted to follow up with Gigabyte officially. Now, we've spoken to some more people since then, and our understanding is that it will remain X299. G is a Gigabyte thing. Gigabyte decided to add the G to the end of X299. That is not Intel. Gigabyte does it to differentiate the newer or the refresh SKUs versus the older ones. As we understand it, Intel has no current plans to release a new X499 chipset. That could change, but if they do, there probably won't be massive changes to the chipset. We'll see. That part we're a little uncertain on. What we are absolutely certain on is the board at Computex was not X499. It was X299G, as Gigabyte calls it, but X299. Anyway, probably not going to be an X499 chipset for the update. Glacier Falls, I think they call it, later this year. But that's what we know. So X499, unfortunately, not actually at the show. That's something that, a little inside information for you, though. A lot of the times the boards that say they have a new chipset, if it's like the only one you've seen from a show, like that one, they don't actually have a new chipset. They're just named that. And then the real trick was the person showing it able to, with or without the company knowing, remove the chipset heatsink. And if they did, take a good look at the chipset and see if it physically looks different than the previous models, or if it's got a laser etched name in it, then even easier. And that may tell you if it's actually the new chipset or not. That's not just this launch, that's all of them going forward. Keep that in mind. Moving on, Windows. Patch BlueKeep and the exploit, and then Windows 10 getting variable refresh rate toggles in the OS. Not long ago, we reported on a wormable exploit that warranted enough caution for Microsoft to deliver a critical update to the ancient Windows XP. The exploit has since earned the name BlueKeep, and Microsoft has doubled down on its warning to update and patch almost all Windows versions. Even the NSA has added its voice to the chorus. Quote, the National Security Agency is urging Microsoft Windows administrators and users to ensure they are using a patched and updated system in the face of growing threats. Recent warnings by Microsoft stressed the importance of installing patches to address a protocol vulnerability in older versions of Windows. They went on to say that this is a wormable flaw that could be fixed. So TLDR, update Windows. It actually matters this time. And then finally, and we'll keep this one short because we're running long, the May 2019 Steam hardware survey shows RTX is a slow burner. Despite the aspiring competition in the Epic Games Store, Steam is the foremost PC gaming platform still, and its new PC hardware survey shows some information on RTX. The most notable observation is that RTX card adoption rate is on the rise, slowly but surely. The install base for NVIDIA's RTX cards rose roughly 0.31% between April and May, with the RTX 2060 accounting for the bulk of that growth, unsurprisingly. NVIDIA's 1060 and 1050 Ti still remain the most popular cards. Outside of GPUs, most gamers are still using quad-core CPUs, with hexa-core and octa-core processors being a distant second and third place. Windows 10 is still the OS of choice, and 1920 by 1080 is still the most dominant resolution for the majority of gamers on the platform. So that'll cap our news recap for the week. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly or grab one of our mod mats. They will be on back order once again now that we've figured out the issues with the tariffs. And patreon.com/gamersnexus for behind the scenes videos. Thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time.